Hey guys, it's Summer Rayne from Homestead, Brooklyn, and I am here in hot Miami, Florida at the Fairchild Tropical Botanic Gardens. Now, if you remember, we actually visited here back in February, but that was post-Hurricane Irma, and there has been a lot of changes to this garden since I've been here. So I'm back with Chad Husby. We're going to take a walk around the conservatory to see the new plantings and also their world-class Ficus deltoidea collection. So welcome to this week's episode of Plant One on Me, Field Trip Edition.
My name is Chad Husby. I'm the botanical horticulturist here at Fairchild, and I mainly work on introducing new plants to the garden and also distributing them to the public and to other gardens and just kind of spreading the joy and excitement of tropical plants.
Well, the last time I was here was in February. It was winter and it was post-Irma. So there's been some changes obviously here at the garden. Do you want to say a little bit of what's changed since that time?
Hurricane Irma was quite an event. We lost about 90 trees, but it gave us an opportunity because it opened up a lot of areas that we weren't able to plant in before. And this was kind of also David Fairchild back in the 20s when he went through some very bad hurricanes. He was crawling through the wreckage of his home and all the different plants there, and he was already thinking of new plantings. So we're kind of trying to continue in that spirit. And so we've planted since January over 1,000 new plants throughout the garden, many of them in the conservatory here, but many all over the garden, and we're really trying to make it into a renaissance.
Well, I can't imagine that you do all the planting. I'm imagining that you do some of the planting, but who are some of the other folks that actually help do all that planting? Because that's not an insignificant number of trees and new plants.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a big team effort. My colleague, Dr. Brett Jestro, who's Director of Collections, is a big part of that whole project, and our plant recorder, Yisu Santa Marina, she loves planting and helping with us and helping to keep track of what we're planting and where, which is really critical for a botanic garden. And we have teams of volunteers who come and help us out, and we couldn't do it without the volunteers, so it's been a big team effort for sure.
Last time we actually showed some of the conservatory, but you've made quite some significant changes in the conservatory as well, right?
Absolutely. The conservatory, we didn't get any direct damage from the hurricane here, but we kind of wanted to continue in the spirit of renewal, so we've tried to move out some of the plants in here that didn't need to be in the conservatory, but they provided some of the ambiance, but we now have so many new things we can put in to upgrade the ambiance in a sense. And so we've removed a lot of large specimens, moved them outside, and then we've been just injecting tons of new plants from all our travels overseas.
So when you say something that it doesn't need to be in the conservatory, you mean like, hey, the weather's fine outside and it actually could grow outside?
Exactly, yeah, because the conservatory was finished in 1968, and Florida's weather was a little cooler then. We've had a little warming in our climate here. And also a lot of plants weren't very well tested back then. We didn't know how they were going to grow. The conservatory is heated so we can take the edge off any winter chill we have from up north, any of those Canadian storms that come down here. And so we basically, those plants that we already know can grow outside because other people have grown them successfully, we now can be confident we can move them out and grow things we know are much more delicate in here. And also things that need really good water quality, because these conservatories have reverse osmosis water, so it's like rainwater all year. And the rainwater, this reverse osmosis water is very pure because our water from the ground here has a lot of limestone. There are some tropical plants that just don't like a lot of limestone, don't like high pH.
Great. Well, I think without further ado, I don't want to keep the viewers waiting. We'll go and see some of your new plantings here in the conservatory.
Wonderful. So David Fairchild, who our garden is named after, went on a great big expedition to Southeast Asia in 1939 and 1940, and he brought back and photographed a lot of wonderful plants. But some of them that came back, it was too cold or whatnot, and this is one of them that didn't make it from that expedition, but that we've been able to subsequently grow. This is Dillenia philippinense that David Fairchild in 1939, he has these pictures of flowers and he really loved it. And we were wondering why didn't it survive to the present day, and so this year we had some nights in the 40s and the ones we had outside in the shade house just totally defoliated and suffered. So we know that this is a plant that really needs our conservatory, so we're growing it here. It produced one set of these big beautiful white flowers and we're waiting for it to bulk up and produce more. But they only last a day and then and then they fall apart. So
I mean, the leaves to me look like Mycesis antarctica or even just like a giant elm.
yes, that's a great description.
So this is like a little riparian area that you've kind of built over here?
Yeah, this area was actually, it had gotten kind of covered by a lot of overgrowth of various vines, and so we've cleared it out and we've made it into a little mosaic of plants that like these kind of moist waterfall type tropical conditions. And so we got a lot of little treasures here. This is kind of an interesting plant. This is Dorstenia choconiana that we got from one of our sister botanic gardens here in Florida from Marie Selby. And it's a relative of figs, and this one, its inflorescence looks kind of like the bottom of a fig if you cut it off, and it's full of little tiny flowers, and then these plants will just volunteer around and produce these very strange, almost hobbit-like flowers, if you want to call them that.
And I know you're partial to ficus.
Oh yes, I'm very fond of ficus, and we'll be looking at a few ficus a little later. And we also have very special, this is a beautiful begonia, metallic begonia from Borneo that will get much longer leaves and they will get much darker, and we're not exactly sure what the name of it is yet. And we also have some interesting aroids. There are only about 10 species of anthurium that grow in rivers, and this is one of them. This is Anthurium antiochens, and it has these very small spathe and spadex inflorescences. And right next to it is its relative Anthurium amnicola, which has the beautiful lavender spathe and spadex.
Tell me a little bit more about these riparian anthuriums in regards to their strap-like leaves.
Definitely. There are a lot of the Asian aroids that grow in rivers also have strap-like leaves like this, and basically when a lot of these rivers flood, they're in monsoonal climates, so that when the water is flowing really fast, the strap-like leaves just provide very little resistance to the water, whereas a lot of aroids that have big, complex leaves, they would just get ripped to shreds. So having these much more simple leaves is definitely a great adaptation to growing next to rivers.
Also really beautiful inflorescences and bracts right there.
Definitely, they're lovely. And they will make little clumps, little colonies, so we're waiting for them to fill in. Some plants, we love and we don't even know exactly what they are, but we're waiting for it to flower. This
little piper
was a little, it looks like it could be a piper, but it hasn't flowered yet. And it does have these little metallic flecks in its leaves. We found it in a market in Thailand and just loved it. So,
what do you think it might be?
Certainly a piper is a great option. It could even be something like a Dioscorea or something. But
oh, that would be interesting.
Yeah, we're just hope it'll be happy enough to flower. But
does it have like a caudex, or does it have like, what is it?
No, it's just got fibrous roots and stuff.
Interesting. And I see you have a little jewel orchid there as well.
You have a jewel orchid, and we're going to be...
Ludicea? Is that just like a Ludicea discolor?
Ludicea discolor, exactly.
And is this a metanilla, or what is this right here?
That is... it's probably not a metanilla. It's in the Melastoma-taceae.
Melastoma, okay.
Yeah, but it has not yet flowered for us also. Yeah. So we're doing a lot of experimenting here. That's part of the role of a botanic garden, is evaluating how plants are going to perform and just figuring out what they are, because we're fortunate to have so many experts coming in all the time that we just, hopefully it'll be blooming when we have someone who knows what it is. So.
Well, also you have a lot more sunlight in here now that you've removed some of the larger trees, and in a way it's like, let's see the best man who wins here, because I'm sure there's going to be some that are climbing up towards the sunlight, because right now it seems pretty low to the ground in some areas here, but you're going to see probably very quickly who's going to lap up all this sun.
Absolutely. We've been planting actually some plants to climb up the walls and to take advantage of that sun, including some interesting pipers and this mystery philodendron here that has got silver leaves, but nobody's sure what it is.
Like a hastatum.
It's a hastatum type, but it doesn't get hastate, which is the mystery. It's just kind of trying to emphasize near the edges here all the different shapes and patterns of leaves, all the wonderful different colors and patterns that leaves can have, and there are so many of them. Like this is a Laquala matanensis, the Mapu palm, and which has these spectacularly mottled leaves, and it comes in all kinds of different versions, some of which are very sharply delineated contrast between the green and the lighter green and yellow, and some Some it's a little more blurry, like the one growing next to it. And so if you grow a batch of seedlings of these, you get all these amazing variations.
And you have that little Aglaonema picta tricolor there.
Yes, indeed.
Hiding out in its camouflage.
Yeah, we're trying to keep the understory plants in the understory. And we've planted also this black Zamioculcas here that has recently come in from Thailand.
Yeah, and we were talking about this and how it actually comes in a little bit more, all the new growth actually comes in lighter green.
Definitely, it's kind of the reverse of a lot of tropical plants where the new growth comes really dark colored, red or brown, and then turns green. This one, they come out green and then they gradually get darker and darker. So it's just what we'd hope for in an ornamental plant, to have the spectacular color showing up and its maturity, so that it continues that way. So we're excited about that one.
Well, speaking of black plants, what is that?
That's actually an ardisia. Ardisias that grow in the understories of tropical forests in Southeast Asia. They have really beautifully dark, glossy leaves, and so we're growing more and more of those. And they have another virtue that you can reproduce them from leaf cuttings, so it's a very slow way to propagate them, but that way we can multiply these already very slow-growing and beautiful plants. And we're also exploring another type of plant that's been very underappreciated in horticulture. These are the palm grasses. This is curculigo, and this is one that's got purple undersides of the leaves, and these really glossy, dark green upper sides. And you know, a fairly green, not too exciting looking type of palm grass has been common in horticulture, but there are all these colorful ones from Southeast Asia. Different sizes, different leaf thicknesses, colors, and so we're working on seeing how much of that diversity we can get into cultivation here in the US.
And these are typically then understory plants.
Yeah, they typically are, though some of them can take a lot of light. But they're fairly adaptable, but they do tend to be understory, yeah. Another of these groups that's often underappreciated are the lycopods, and the genus Selaginella, and this is Selaginella picta, which is from Vietnam, and it's a species that's really spectacular, and I saw pictures of it about 4 years ago online and never thought I'd get a chance to see the real thing until it came into horticulture in Thailand, and last December we were able to bring some into cultivation, and it actually is growing nicely, so we're really excited. It's the only Selaginella I know of where it has the central leaves just turn white very early on in its development and give it this intensely variegated look. And there are 700 plus species of Selaginella in the world, so there's a lot to discover for ornamental horticulture. And many of them are so great as terrarium plants. Some of them can even be houseplants in the open air. So we want as much of the wonderful plants as we possibly can. And
looks like this begonia is already kind of making its way through.
Yes, definitely. That's a very interesting, that's Begonia felme. It's from Brazil, and it makes a wonderful ground cover.
It has a zigzag stems, very similar to, what is it? Can't remember it now. Solomon seal.
Oh, Solomon seal, yeah.
Yeah, which is unusual, like the little zigzag, you know?
It is unusual, and we have actually a native in Florida, also a native, it's a vanilla orchid that actually does that too. We actually have it right outside the conservatory. We could go take a look there. I'd like to mention a very special heliconia we have in here. It's Heliconia gloriosa, and it's one that does need sheltered conditions. It's got the beautiful red undersides and the almost metallic-y upper sides, because most heliconias are grown for their inflorescences, for their beautiful, but this is one that is grown mostly for its really ornamental foliage.
Well, I also love that you have it right next to this Calathea, because it gives you a nice little comparison, because this one, what is this, Worsconwitzii?
Worsconwitzii, yep.
Because this one has also, you know, this one doesn't have the purple bottoms, but this one has the velvety touch, and it's nice to be able to compare those two side by side. I don't know if you did that, you know, on purpose, but.
Yeah, we did. We have wanted to kind of combine the, you know, these iridescent sheens and textures together to also see how they cross through the plant world, these different patterns.
I don't know if you know the name of this one, but this one with the pink stripe down the middle, is this a type of Aglaonema?
That is actually a, yeah, this is an Aglaonema, yes.
This
yeah,
is an Aglaonema.
No, so delicate, yeah.
Is this one lose its spots afterwards or no?
No.
Okay.
That one stays small. It becomes like a little mound.
Very cool.
Speaking of interesting patterns, we have this Eladostema, which is in the nettle family, the Urticaceae, And there's a whole diversity of different leaf patterns, colors, textures that grow in the understory of forests in Southeast Asia. And we're trying to introduce more of them, and they make these really interesting little globular inflorescences with tons and tons of little flowers.
And it's really lovely corrugated leaves, which almost like toad skin.
Definitely.
And then you have an apicia here, which has a nice bronze color. They spread very nicely. And then is this a pilea?
That's a pilea, yeah.
I see what you're doing here with like the metallic sheens and everything.
Oh yes, we have the ginger, the Campharia with its metallic sheen as well. And we have some interesting new aroids here. This is actually not even sure what genus these are, but they're a riparian aroid from Southeast Asia. And also having these linear narrow leaves, much like the anthuriums that are in a whole different section of the aroids. And but similar adaptation to the fast-flowing rivers where they grow.
I kind of have to show these gingers right here.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They're really, really striking against the green.
The Siam rose at Lingera corneri. It's fairly sensitive to water quality, so it likes to be in this protected area. Speaking of colors, we have this wonderful palm. This is Geonoma atrovirens that's from the Amazon of Colombia. It has these amazingly dark leaves, and it doesn't make a trunk, and the leaves will get only about this tall, and it will get even darker. So it's the perfect conservatory plant because it won't outgrow the conservatory. It's very cold sensitive, so it needs the protection and the good water, and will look amazing. So we're very happy to have that.
Is that some schismatoglottis over there, or what is the ones?
Yeah, that's a schismatoglottis. Not sure which species, but.
And then some. I don't want to miss anything. These are some type of alocasia here. Do you say alocasia or alocasia? I've heard it pronounced both ways.
Yeah, they're both. Because really there is no correct pronunciation. Because it depends also on what country you're in. So.
Yeah, that's true. And then it's some type of Dieffenbachia here, right? Or
actually, this is probably a Homelamina, I think, or something like that. It's an Asian.
So nice.
That we brought back from Thailand a few years ago.
And do you know if these are species or cultivars?
That is a good question. Lots of contrast of color and shape and patterns here. This is a Certosperma johnstonii, which is a wonderful aquatic aroid from Southeast Asia.
Unless you touch the stem.
They are, yes, and it has these amazing prickly stems with a great color banding on them. And this gets much larger. We have a bigger specimen near our pond on the other side, but when they're small, the colors are especially vivid. And these are very cold sensitive, so they really need these conservatory conditions. And then that's overshadowing this beautiful sedge. It's Mapania caudata from Southeast Asia that has this amazing metallic blue color.
Well, it looks very similar to, I might get the scientific name wrong, but is it the Microsorum, the ferns? And it even has those really thin strap-like leaves, sedge-like leaves. So it's nice to know that that's a sedge. I mean, obviously it's clumping a little bit more like a sedge.
Absolutely, but they're both, in these shady understory plants, and it seems that may have some adaptive functions, but it's still not exactly clear what they are. So it's still one of the botanical mysteries, and it's growing next to what I think is probably an interesting, actually a species, Aglonema. It is from one of the collections in Singapore. One
of my favorites. I mean, in a way, the leaves at first glance look like Calathea, and then you get closer and you're like, wow, that is one impressive Aglonema, wow.
And we've got palms here that also produce these fascinating colors in the understory of the forest. This is Pananga distica. And sometimes they lose this patterning as they get bigger, but some of them, like this one, is one that tends to at least keep a lot of it as it gets bigger. And it doesn't get that big either. So
is this a pilea in the back, like a massive one, or?
That's a piper.
Piper, sorry,
yeah, this
piper.
is a piper. Yeah, here.
I always mess those up, but yeah, that is.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Pretty cool.
And another interesting color of leaves we have here is these copper-colored leaves of this Ardisia from Malaysia. So one of the things we changed in here, we used to have a massive palm here, a big spiny Salak palm, Salacca magnifica, that was getting a little dangerous. It was so close to the path, so we moved it outside. But that gave us this whole area to plant with all kinds of wonderful new plants. This is a big, larger version of the palm grass, that curculigo, this one with metallic purple upper sides. And you can see the flowers at the base that let you know that it's not a palm, not a grass, not a cyclant, but something different. And we want to preserve the view through the conservatory, so we planted something that's going to be fairly open here as the centerpiece. And this is Aristolochia salvadorense. And they call it the Darth Vader flower because it will make flowers at the base that look like they have a helmet and two eyes. So it's, and they're quite dark colored. So it's.
Does it say, "Luke, I am your father"?
I think it could be persuaded to do that. So. But it's the tropical Aristolochias are just the forms of their flowers are so bizarre and beautiful that we're really going to try to feature them more and more in here. So it's. Because most Aristolochias are vines, and this one is actually a small tree. And next to it, we've planted a very interesting phyllanthus that we still don't know what species it is, but it came from a nursery here, and it came with a name that isn't an actually valid name, Phyllanthus thailandensis. So maybe it came through Thailand at some point, but one of the things that's fascinating about it is these stems will actually root in, make little plantlets at the base. It's already forming roots. And so it will actually walk. It's a walking phyllanthus, and I still have no idea what it is or where it came from exactly, but hopefully we'll figure it out someday. There's another new planting we put in here, is a very special palm. It's one that was only described in 2013. It's Sabonaria magnifica, and we don't know, it might be able to survive outside in South Florida, but until then, we're putting it in here where we can give it some special, tender, loving care. And it fortunately doesn't get that tall. It maxes out at about 18 feet. And it just produces these enormous fan leaves that have a very characteristic shape. And so it's a whole new genus that was described not very long ago from near the border of Panama and Colombia. So it doesn't look that exciting now, but it will in a couple years. And next to it, we have the Joey palm, Johannes Tasmania magnifica. It's one of the longest genus names that there is. And that's a palm that also doesn't make a trunk, so it's a perfect conservatory specimen. It just makes these big undivided leaves and that have the beautiful silvery color underneath and will never outgrow the space. So something that's a group that's really underappreciated are the cyclants. And this is Corygini cylindrica that we got from a collection in Wisconsin, a university there. And this is it's not a palm. It's not a palm grass. It's the most closely related group to the pandans of Southeast Asia, but they're only found in the New World. Many of them look like palms, and they're really spectacular ornamentals in many cases. Like this one has super, super leathery leaves, and it creates these beautiful fans, and it won't ever grow taller than about this, so it'll maintain the view. So we're trying to think ahead. And we've decided to start going crazy with hanging plants along this wall. This is a Phlegmariurus that grows hanging in the trees in Southeast Asia. And this is a tropical blueberry next to it in the Ericaceae in the blueberry family. And they do actually make little fruits that are edible. Not always blue, but they have really spectacular flowers. And then we have a Ripsalis, a tropical cactus that's epiphytic, Ripsalis clavata from Brazil. And a couple of other interesting epiphytic cacti there and lycopods. And then something that's here mainly because it's so strange. This is the branch of a tropical conifer, Araucaria subulata. And a lot of these Araucarias, these Norfolk pines they call them, although this one's from New Caledonia, their branches remember where they were. So if you take a cutting and you root it, the branch will just keep growing as a branch indefinitely. 50 years they've had some of these. And so Seems that somehow the...
Bonsai, you know?
Exactly, yeah.
But that it has memory to it, that's very unique.
And it's not exactly clear how that happens, because some conifers, if you take cutting of their branch, it will grow upright again. But in this group, something switches when they change, because all the plant cells in a plant have the same genes. And so this has the same genes as the part that actually grows as an upright tree, but somehow some of those genes were switched off or switched on to keep it in this very low state. And it will produce eventually branches, but they also will stay flat like they are branches on branches on branches, which is a pretty fascinating phenomenon. And this is a very unusual plant next to it. This is a relative of ferns. It's Psilotum. There are only two species of Psilotum in the world. There's Psilotum nudum, the whisk fern, which is mostly an upright growing plant. And this is the other one, Psilotum complanatum, which has flat stems and hangs down as an epiphyte. And these stems can get several feet long. And it produces spores in these little sporangia all along their stem. And then these are more of these tropical lycopods, Phlegmariurus being the genus. And they often call them tassel ferns because the fertile parts, the parts that produce cones, look a lot like the tassels on a graduation hat. And the spores that these produce used to be used in flash photography. They're very flammable, so if you collect enough of them and then light a match, they will produce a big flash. So it's quite fascinating. Below, we've got another group of plants who are really trying to feature the different patterns and textures of leaves. And this is Geogynanthus ciliatus, which has these amazingly wavy leaf surfaces with stripes to make it even cooler. And then we also have next to it another interesting wavy leaf plant. This is a wavy leaf cyclanth. It's Dicranopegium. And it's fascinating because it's pleated in two directions. It's pleated lengthwise, and then it also has the ripples that are at 90-degree angle to that. So it's got double corrugation, which is very unusual in the plant kingdom. And another favorite for just form and pattern here is this is a Selaginella, a new introduction from the Philippines. It's Selaginella magnifica, and it is quite a magnificent one. It's from Mindanao in the Philippines. And it will form a beautiful clump. It's got very thick leaves, kind of like plastic, and these are the cones at the end of the branches here. So that's where the spores are produced. It's lycophytes. And then at each of these branch points, if there's enough humidity and moisture, it will produce a baby plantlet. So it's ready to spread. So we're looking forward to having much more of that growing here. And it's growing right next to a really wonderfully textured piper. It's hairy and has these really, really corrugated leaves.
And the zigzag stem.
And a zigzag stem. Yeah. I should mention these plants have been in here a long time, but they're much easier to see now. This is Impatiens mirabilis, which is the baobab of the impatiens world. So. And this is a yellow flowered type, and they come in different colors. This is the yellow flower here, the impatiens flower. And then on our last trip to Southeast Asia, we brought back some pink and white types. And hopefully they'll start crossing with each other, and we'll get all kinds of new...
Rainbow.
Right, we'll have a whole rainbow of colors, absolutely. Because we have the really good water here, the reverse osmosis water, very pure, and the good soil and the protection, we've planted some Virrea rhododendrons, which are the tropical mountain rhododendrons of Southeast Asia, and many of which like cooler climates, but these are different hybrids that are more vigorous, that were made by various folks in Hawaii and Australia and whatnot. And they've got great names, like this is a Simbu Sunset. It's got the beautiful orange and yellow colors in its flowers. And these actually are epiphytic as well. And so we're sinking them in pots so that they have an epiphytic soil, yeah. And then this one that's next to it is Dresden Doll. It's got kind of the more light pink flower. And this is the first time we've had two, since we planted them earlier this year, that we've had two different ones flowering at the same time. So it's an exciting moment. And also in these habitats, there are often the tropical pitcher plants, the nepenthes. So we've planted a number of species of those nepenthes here. And some of them are starting to climb on the vireas. So we've got one over here that's already hooking on to the rhododendrons. And so we'll have an environment that's a little bit like what you might see in a lower mountain in Southeast Asia. And we've also placed some other really interesting little treasures in here. There's a little, what looks like a little forest of conifers down there. That's a terrestrial lycopod, one of these club mosses. It's not a moss, but a lycophyte. But it's called Palhinhea cernua, and it forms these beautiful little colonies. It's called the nodding club moss because when it makes its cones, they hang down like little ornaments on a tree. So
this little grassy one right there.
This little grassy one here is a fern. Yeah, we've got some other unusual gems of the tropics here. This is in the grape family. It's Cyphostemma mapia, and it's from Mauritius, and it's the baobab of Mauritius. This can potentially become a big tree with a fat trunk, and like many interesting trees in Mauritius, when it's small, when it's a juvenile, it's got these narrow, dark colored leaves, and then as it gets mature, they turn green, and this may have something to do with deterring actually tortoise herbivory. So the tortoises get thrown off by the darker color, but when they're small, the colors are really spectacular.
I was looking at this the other day, and I didn't know what this was. And you know, I have a jatropha that it sits like, it's red. It doesn't have leaves, anything like this, but the color of it reminded me of my jatropha, and the jatropha has like a nice, like, thick stem like this. But that's fascinating. I know you have a lot of different species from Mauritius.
Definitely, Mauritius has got a lot of interesting plants from it. Yeah, this is a beautiful epiphytic aroid from Borneo. It's Syndapsis crassipes, and it actually is a litter trapping plant, so it makes this big fan of leaves that actually trap leaves and whatnot that come down, and that is something its roots can grow into, and they produce nutrients as they decompose.
So it drops down into here.
It'll drop down behind the leaves if this was growing on the side of a tree trunk, and it makes this big kind of catchment. So it's a whole different form of aroid that we haven't had in here.
And do you know where that's native to again, you said?
It's native to Borneo and Malaysia, and probably Sumatra, I believe, as well. So
it's gorgeous.
It's quite spectacular. We brought this back from Thailand in December. And another interesting aroid we brought back from Thailand is this interesting Rhaphidophora that is actually deciduous, apparently. It grows on limestone in South Thailand, in Southeast Thailand near Phuket. And it has really thick leathery leaves, and when we brought it back, it actually did drop all its leaves and then grew them right back. So we were happy to know it was deciduous, so we didn't give up hope. But it looks like it's very promising.
And why do you think it's deciduous? Is it during the dry season that it would drop its leaves, or?
Yeah, it seems like that's an area that's quite seasonal, and also because it's growing right on the limestone rock, there isn't really any water storage, so once it gets dry enough, they just decide don't want any more evaporative surface areas.
Are there any plants not necessarily within that genus that drop its leaves in that same area?
I believe so, yeah. I believe it's a seasonally dry forest, and there's a lot of different trees that have that adaptation, definitely. We also have this wonderful Solanum species here, and it's got really velvety leaves and hairs and a kind of almost glimmer in the sunshine. But it's in the same genus as potatoes and tomatoes, and when it flowers, it does have a little flower that looks like a tomato or potato flower. It's from Ecuador.
I find these so hard to grow in the house because they always seem to get spider mites. I think you have to give them like perfect conditions.
Yes, they are a magnet for pests, but here we actually seem to have some of the natural enemies and whatnot that can survive, so we don't tend to have a lot of pest issues, which is one of the advantages of being in a very tropical climate. I'd like to mention this is a very interesting plant that we brought from Singapore Botanic Gardens. It's a relative of Pandanus. It's in the genus Benstonia, and it doesn't make a trunk or anything. It just has these clumps of these really beautiful kind of dark green with silvery leaves, And it makes these interesting spiky infructescences below that will hopefully produce some seeds for us. And we've really started to transform this area of the conservatory. We've taken out a lot of the more common things here, the things that don't need to be in here in this protected zone, and we've totally opened up the ponds again. And so we have some interesting aquatic aerides. We've got Typhonodorum here that is from Mauritius and other islands in that region that gets to be fairly tall, and it grows right in the water like that. And right next to it is Certosperma mercusii, which gets to be enormous, and David Fairchild was very fond of it. In some of its habitats, the leaves can get to be 18 feet tall, so it's one of the bigger aroid leaves in the world. And in the upper corner of the pond, we have a little tree there that looks like a miniature bonsai, and it's actually a very special tropical conifer, Retrophyllum minus from New Caledonia. That's one of the very few conifers that likes to grow in water, but it likes to grow in flowing water, so we have the waterfall and we've got the water constantly recirculating through the pond, so it's the perfect environment for that very rare and endangered plant. And we have some other little special plants in the pond. We have this water lily in the middle is from Madagascar. It's Nymphea minuta. It's one of the very few water lilies that likes shade. So it's a good, if you were to even try one as a houseplant, that would be one of the best ones to try.
I actually have one growing in my biopod.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, it's the ideal. And I hear there are a few other water lilies in Australia and whatnot that also like shade, but we're hoping they'll enter cultivation too. And
here's your other giant Certosperma.
This is our big old Certosperma johnstonii. It's about a 10-year-old plant, and it's got a beautiful inflorescence on it there. And we're just about to plant some new palms here. These are liqualas, and this is on the one on the end here is Liquala orbicularis, and these leaves get huge and geometric and look just like, like an enormous water lily or something. And it's very, very slow growing. We've been growing these for 3 years. Then the mapu palm next to it, Liquala matinense, so we want to just kind of have all these different patterns and colors of liqualas to look down on. And we've got some interesting new ferns here. This is Angiopteris smithii, which most of the giant mulefoot ferns have leaves that are divided many times. This one's strange because it's divided only once. So it looks more like a cycad in many ways. And then one of the new introductions we're really, really excited about, this is Aristolochia philippinense. It actually has these very unusual flowers that look almost like a goose or something. Yeah. And the nice thing is most Aristolochias are climbers, very vigorous climbers, woody climbers, which isn't very practical for growing in pots or as a houseplant. And others are small trees. This one is a little herb, basically. It doesn't get more than a couple feet tall, and it doesn't climb, and so it would be the perfect pot plant. And it constantly flowers.
Do those flowers smell of anything special, or?
They don't smell that people detect them very well, but there's just enough that like little flies go in and pollinate them.
So it probably has a little bit of a stinkier smell.
A little bit, yeah, but most people don't seem to detect it. And then ants spread their seeds in nature, so we're hoping to see some of them start popping up through the
Whose little aroid-like flower is this?
That is a Certosperma.
Oh, that is.
That we have. Yeah, it's not johnstonii, but it's another one, a smaller species. Talk about, this is a very interesting Rhaphidophora we just planted back in December from our Thailand trip that we're looking forward to see how big the leaves get bigger and bigger as it climbs. So it's started from about a third of how high it is now, and so we're looking forward to seeing how far it will go. And another very interesting of these unusual climbers we have here is this plant, which is actually a fig, a ficus.
Ficus, that's villosa?
Ficus villosa, exactly. So we've got it, it's really started climbing up the wall quite vigorously.
A lot of great climbers.
So yeah, most definitely.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't show the one that is the monster on the ceiling right here.
It's definitely, that's a wonderful syndapsis we've got going. Yeah, there's very interesting Dracaena that is a new introduction that's called Stardust. It's a hybrid between two Dracaenas from Borneo, that one of which has big, beautiful strap-like leaves but loses its spots as it gets mature, and the other one is a smaller one with less spectacular leaves, but it keeps its spots all the time. And a wonderful breeder in Indonesia by the name of Gregory Hambali combined the virtues of both those species to make this new hybrid, so which has the long strap-like leaves and it always maintains its spots. So we're pretty excited about that. And actually next to it is a new species of syzygium that's got these wonderfully pleated leaves, and it will hopefully be described soon, but the leaves will get a couple times bigger than they are now. It's quite a bold tropical plant. And this year we introduced a whole new family of plants to the Fairchild, and this is Hunguana. It's a Hunguana bogneri, and it's a family it's in the family Hunguanaceae that's in Southeast Asia. And they're really beautiful. There's one that's very aquatic, and there are a lot of these that grow on the understory of tropical forests, and they're really, it's a really, it's a whole group that just hasn't even been tried in horticulture here before, so we're pretty excited about them.
You like it, guys? This looks pretty cool, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
And there's purple on the
guys, I think she wants to film
there's purple on the bottom.
Exactly, they're purple on the bottom, yeah. They're really purple. So a very interesting and obscure little world of figs is in Southeast Asia. It consists of one species, Ficus deltoidea. Mostly they're epiphytes, so they grow on rocks. Epiphytes mean they grow on the branches of trees and whatnot. But this species is incredibly diverse. In different localities throughout Malaysia, Borneo, you'll go to one spot and the leaves will look very different than in another. And so been very vigorously collecting these over the last 7 years, and we now have 24 different varieties, which is probably the biggest assemblage of Ficus deltoidea varieties in the world at the moment. And you can even see how interesting and how variable their leaves are in this one, because this one actually switches leaf forms within the same plant. Some of them have the classic branched deltoid veins here, and others of them have a sort of a more normal central vein that branch off to the side, and then they will switch from one to the other, like here it is, and then they'll go back to the rounded leaves, and then back to this other type of leaf. And so before, this used to be called Ficus diversifolia, which was a really good name. And so we've put different varieties in each pot, and like this one has these little very cupped leaves that are folded. Some of these have some interesting color on them, sort of rounded convex leaves. This one doesn't look very similar at all. It just has the central vein and has more normal fig-looking leaves.
Oh yeah, look at all of them that you have here.
And we've got so many of them, yeah. And then these are and the figs vary too. Some of the figs are large, some of them are small. This is sort of a medium-sized one. And they even vary in their shapes. And they can have really nice color. This is what often attracts people, is the golds and the oranges.
And the gold around the edging.
Even around the edges.
Yeah.
And there's also the little gold dots that are often visible on the surface of the leaves, and that's in the Malay language. They actually are named for those gold dots. They're called mas chotek, which means gold dot. And those little gold dots actually denote these little structures called hydothodes, which are like on strawberry plants and whatnot. When it's in the early morning, when it's been humid and a little cool at night, there will be little droplets all along the the leaves, the surface of the leaves, in a very distinctive pattern, and that's because they're actually pushing water from their vascular system out of the leaves, and these figs have those too, and that's where they've got a little colored gold dot. And so if you come in and look at these early in the morning, you'll see all these little droplets on the leaves.
So is that more like gutation?
It's gutation, yeah. That's the phenomenon that it's.
And it doesn't. They don't have then, like when I see some philodendrons, they have like little nectaries that are like red colored or whatever. So those aren't nectaries either. They don't.
Those aren't nectaries though, but they do have these what are probably domatia, or little oil glands underneath the leaves. These dark areas. Some varieties have them more prominent than others, and those may be a home for certain types of mites in nature. And then you can see some of them have a little bit of a heart shape with a little bit of a kind of a sinus in the middle here. And once again, they've all got their own variations on the colors. And then others of them have really, really broad leaves with really dramatically branched veins, like this one. And really dramatic color. Others of them have much, much smaller leaves. See, this one has little, somewhat triangular leaves.
And a lot of fruit on this one.
A lot of fruit on that one, yeah. And this one is the small heart-leafed one with really, really tiny figs on it.
I think I got a cutting of this from you, and you know what? It's doing extremely well.
Excellent. Yeah, they do make great houseplants because they don't like a lot of light. They prefer to be in a little shade, and they're tolerant of dryness. And you know, this is one with some interesting puckering on the leaves that we brought back from Thailand this time.
The water just kind of sticks right in there.
Exactly, and it's more compact too. And
yeah, that's a nice one. That's an attractive one.
Pretty excited about that one. And this one has a kind of a more flattened fig, and this one's from Borneo. It's a beautiful color on the undersides.
Yeah, I like that kind of gold mustardy color.
Definitely, and they also vary in their habit. Like some of them are fairly upright, like these are quite upright, and then we have some like this one, where the branches mostly go out horizontally, and so some of these are epiphytes very high on in the canopy, and they just kind of hang down. So
are any of these figs actually edible?
you could eat them, but they wouldn't taste good, you know, and they don't ripen when they're in cultivation because they all have their own little wasp that pollinates them, and we don't have the wasps here, and they don't make good seed outside their native habitat. You can see how much the fig size can vary from quite a large one here to much, much smaller. And also these very linear leaves. This is one of the ones, sometimes the varieties higher in higher elevation have narrower leaves, and that's where this is from the mountains.
So are you going to plant these in here, or are you going to kind of leave them in the pots?
We're going to leave them in the pots because we've experimented with planting them in the ground, and often they just kind of go into stasis when they really want to be in a confined container, and that's how they grow in nature. They tend to grow in, you know, in a cleft in a rock or on a tree branch or something. So they're real epiphytes, which is nice, and it makes them. So they love being in pots. In fact, they'll grow. A lot of these were just recently repotted, but they'll grow even quite large in a little tiny pot. They'll grow into a big plant. So they're really quite unusual for figs and quite special.
Hey guys, so I hope you really enjoyed that tour here at the Fairchild Tropical Botanic Gardens. If you're ever in Miami, be sure to visit. And of course, if you like these episodes, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and you can follow along on my daily journey on my Instagram at Homestead Brooklyn and on my website at homesteadbrooklyn.com. Thanks a lot. See you next week.